Trade is key in achieving market integration in Africa. Today, the focus is on achieving sustainable economic integration between Nigeria and South Africa. I'm Onyi Sunday. In a few minutes, I'll bring you highlights from the roundtable discussion organized by Brand South Africa in collaboration with CNBC Africa.
So the format is, I'm now going to turn to my discussion leaders, and we're going to start with Mr. Phillips. So, Mr. Phillips, the stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I think it's a good thing that that's been done this morning by gathering everybody together to talk about Nigeria, South Africa. My first statement is that I don't think we're doing enough. Sometimes I say it's a great shame to have two countries that are so strong on the continent, knowing that really if we come together, we can really move the continent. And at the same time, deep down in there somewhere, something seems to be going wrong. I have talked a lot about this, and a lot of my close friends in South Africa call me Mr. Love, in the sense that I said the fundamental thing is that Nigeria and South Africa, we need to begin to love each other for a start, and then hope other things will follow. Several years ago, about 26 years ago, I made my first trip out to South Africa, and obviously things were very, very different then. And over the years, what has happened is that we've moved from different levels of, first of all, it was all about trust or mistrust or distrust between the two. And I think it was, the South Africans were very, very skeptical a bit about Nigeria and not really knowing what was going on. And don't forget, at the early stages, Nigeria, we were the ones that were giving South Africa a hard time about getting rid of apartheid and so on. So the feeling was rather sort of watch and let's be very careful how we move forward. But what really transformed everything, I mean, let's be honest, was that great MTN breakthrough. I think MTN coming in actually forced a relationship between the two countries. Such a huge investment that was making such a huge impact on the economy in terms of the ability to get this telephony thing going and transforming from our old traditional telecommunication challenges to the beautiful thing that the MTNs of this world brought together. And obviously that meant an influx of South Africans in many, many ways, both in terms of individuals, in terms of the flow of money, the value chain of all the things that took place. I did a lot of work with MTN at that time also as a firm. And trust me, there were major issues. And I talk about these things because sometimes we know we need to do business. We know there are opportunities. We can give a long list, listening to all of you here, long list of where we can put our money, both sides of the equator. But like I said, today, we have a situation where we just got to decide that, we've got to work together. I think we should. I call it the mutuality of relationships. We've got to be able to get something, out of working together. And it isn't enough to just ship South African products here and then just find out that there's no value that is being added. I always give this story, and I'll say it and then I'll sit down because I hope you got the drift. We say and we boast that Nigeria has a very positive balance of trade with South Africa, and it's significantly oil. A lot of it is just oil. So just that one commodity is giving us this pride of saying that we got a positive balance of payments with South Africa. But then again, I say that if you take literally, if you call this a liter of oil, crude oil, and you take a liter of wine, and you look at the value that goes into making, producing and selling and having on your dining table a bottle of wine, the value chain and the level of participation of the South African economy in producing a bottle of wine compared to us producing a liter of crude oil, you can see that South Africans are getting more value from a bottle of wine than we are getting from a bottle of crude oil that's sent to South Africa.
When two countries enter into a business relationship, he elaborates, they both have to add value by engaging and encouraging people. The parties should learn from each other, and in areas where one country is a clear leader, the other shouldn't reject its leadership, but rather partner with it in a mutually beneficial relationship.
The issue is we have not really been doing much of what we need to do. We have been distracted by the challenges and the problems that we pick up on a regular basis. And as a consequence of that, we don't see the benefits that the relationship between Nigeria and South Africa carries for all the business people, both here and in South Africa. I've always asked the question, if they say, or if it is said, that we have about 120 companies, big brand companies in Nigeria, we also want to have better information on the kind of businesses that are operating in South Africa from Nigeria. And I think once we have that, we'll be able to understand quite clearly the need and the interaction that we must strengthen. And I think two things will help us: agriculture and tourism. The question that I also think we must reflect on here is how can we change the narrative as people sitting here, change the narrative and the perceptions that continue to define what must happen between the two countries. These negative perceptions that are there. What are the instruments that we have? What instruments do we have at our disposal to totally change the scenario? What are the things that we need to do together to project this new image that we consistently talk about? But the situation has its own ups and downs. Are there key policy issues that needs to be addressed that can change totally the perception that people may have about the relationship? For instance, what are the structures that must exist to manage and govern this kind of relationship that we have? Do we have them? If we don't, why do we not have them? So that we can begin to talk about these things. One of the issues, of course, we'll have to address is the issue of immigration. How do we deal with this so that we both understand? Because there are challenges. There are challenges both sides. And we are getting information as to what is happening when people want to come here and all of that. And there are challenges, of course, that needs to be addressed also from here. And I think we cannot avoid the fact that the visa constitute a central tool for mobility of business people, and we need to address those kind of issues. Because if we can remove all the obstacles that seem to be affecting in a negative way the manner in which we are conducting business, definitely these two giants of Africa can become the new platform to drive both the relationship between ourselves, but also generally and broadly Agenda 2063, because there are many things there that we are all enjoined to do. From where we sit, ours is to ensure that we create that environment that business people need to interact. And we do so through many other means, discussions, but also through the kind of the immigration system. So if there are problems that business people are experiencing, which requires our focus and intervention, tell us. We don't have much, many platforms through which we discuss some of these issues. And this is a better platform because it is constituted by the high-level business people. So from the South African consulate, we would like to know what is it that we need to do to make sure that we facilitate business mobility effectively, of course taking into account all other things, effectively between South Africa and Nigeria and vice versa.
I think it's important to perhaps, situate the conversation from a development perspective. And the first thing is that overall as a continent, we're still incredibly poor. So sometimes I feel the bigger economies within Africa have an illusion of wealth and prosperity, but as a continent, we're an incredibly poor continent. overall we still generate a fraction of the GDP of the United States of America. We've got, depending on who you talk to, 120 million people under 35 who are unable to find work. Another 100 odd million who are still vulnerable within their temporary jobs. So if you look at it, you can find that these are reasons for insecurity, strife all across the continent. And we've had this conversation for a long time on how to improve the business environment. You know, every time we hang around in Kigali or in Cape Town or in Abuja and talk about having a single passport, but here we are still talking about issuing visas. I mean, and across both ways. Personally, if I look at even personal experiences as a government official, going across Africa, it's incredibly difficult. So I don't even understand. I can't understand how the business community survives it. And this is not just a Nigeria problem; it's across the continent. But in all of that, there's still some incredible opportunities. The continent, as we all know, has a lot of landlocked countries. Therefore, movement of goods especially is still incredibly difficult. And I think that the hubs, economies like Nigeria and South Africa, need to share information better. I mean, if I think about Lagos, we have incredible problems with power. Now I hear Cape Town has some interesting problems with water. And it tells you that, you know, if you don't collaborate a lot better, individually these economies will start to crumble. So we know what the problems are. And I think the conversation today is really to understand, for me especially as a subnational representative, how subnational collaboration can happen. And in some cases we find that collaborating as countries sometimes has incredible bureaucracy around it. And perhaps there's an opportunity to find large subnationals who can sit down and sign or see how they can work as sister cities and pilot some things that, if successful, can then be enhanced at national level.
Highlights from the Brand South Africa roundtable discussion continues after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Breaking down trade barriers between Africa's two economic powerhouses, Nigeria and South Africa, will no doubt unlock a model for other countries within the region to adopt. But what needs to be done to achieve this?
So now we are going to have the solutions tabled from each of the representatives that have been selected from each respective table. Judy, do you want to do the honors from your table?
The biggest message that came out here really was that it's about movement. The issue here really is about movement. It's not about people not knowing about the opportunities, not knowing about the potential for engaging, but it's really about facilitating and making it easier for people to move, for capital to move, and those are things that require obviously a certain level of policy engagement. And so of course this is something that we need to take to the respective policymakers and say, well, you know, you need to actually make it easier for people to do business, because if you can't, then people won't come and they'll go somewhere else. I think that's a very simple, straightforward message, and it came out quite strongly. And a key solution in that respect was really that the table identified the Nigeria SA Chamber as being the carrier of that message to the policymakers, because of where they sit strategically.
Another point raised by the same table was that the Lagos State Governor should make a similar visit to South Africa as the one made by Gauteng Premier David Makhura to Nigeria last year.
When you look at the two countries, there seems to be a distinct lack of competitiveness from the Nigerian side. So we seem to be less organizationally competitive. And a useful comment that came from one of the participants was that you can't export inefficiency. Okay, it's not. No one buys inefficiency, not knowingly anyway. So
I'm glad you added that.
Yeah. So looking at, for example, one of those points, we talked about border crossing, so around the policy side. Border crossing seem to be a little bit of a challenge. So people turn up at the airport in South Africa or at the airport in Nigeria, and the whole issue around how you actually then get into the country that you've come to invest in, do business in, becomes a little bit of a challenge. And I know the moderator said that it seemed at one point yesterday easier to go back to South Africa than to actually access Murtala Mohammed Highway. Okay, so the border crossing issue was an important one, and the solutions, because we were trying to look for solutions around this, were two things really. One, how do we fast track access for people inbound, in country, here and into South Africa? And how do we perhaps think about the issuance of visas? So if people are confirmed, known to be bona fide business people who are trying to move across borders, why would they want their passports held up at an embassy for 10 days? When actually, they're going for a 2-day business meeting and they've got other places they want to go. So how do we fast track that? Our friend from Brand South Africa talked about initiatives already underway, training immigration officers to be able to recognize bona fide cases and move them through the system very quickly, and we're looking forward to the outcomes of that, because we did specifically ask how that would be measured, how we would know that training was effective and it wasn't just club sandwiches and orange juice. So we'd very much like to encourage companies in the tech space to look at providing some sort of connectivity in and around the airport. If the government can't do it, then perhaps there are companies in the communication sector who could look at actually putting that in and find a way of recovering their revenue. I arrive at Heathrow or at Dubai Airport and I'm immediately able to FaceTime anybody that I want to talk to.
Many successful local companies, when asked why they are not looking for new markets in South Africa, say that they haven't fully exploited the markets in Nigeria or Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire yet. The question is, how does one encourage businesses that have achieved certain standards in Nigeria to export those standards to South Africa?
So our focus is on what we call low-hanging fruits. In the first case, we talked about mutual visa on arrival. Okay, so most people have already mentioned this anyway, but we talk about mutual visa on arrival for business travelers. Okay, very specifically. So you come into the country, there is already a process whereby you either turn up with a letter and there's already some data on database which corroborates who was invited into the country, and you have your own line and you come straight through and you go through. Okay, so from a welcoming, welcome to South Africa, business person, welcome to Nigeria, business person, that's a very strong thing. Okay, so it helps that whole sense of, from the moment I arrived there, I felt welcome. Okay, that's very important. Now, the next thing here we talked about is data collation, verification, and provision. So for us, we are saying, look, there must be top 10 things each country can collect as data as to what is an opportunity for anybody coming into the country. That data must be there. It must be verified and true, and must be available, whether it's through a mobile app, an online portal, freely available at the airport. So when you arrive at the airport, we talked about internet access, we go one step further. We say, you arrive, you have free Wi-Fi and access to a portal that gives you all the key information you need as a business person. Whether it's hotels, anything to do with business. The core data that you need people to know. So even if they haven't done their research and they're just going for an exploratory trip, they have the opportunity to understand, oh, I didn't know this. I came to do one thing. Oh, wow, okay. I might look into that as well. So data is key. Nigeria is a data poor country. Very much so. Okay, as a company that provides data analytics services, we know that. The ability to close that gap, to make data available in a manner that has reach. So it's not just about, okay, somebody has a portal somewhere, but reach. Whether it is a mobile platform, whether it's an app, whatever it is key. Okay, so that's what we focus on as the second thing. The third thing we looked at was the identification and exchange of what we call points of strength. I think one of the other tables already alluded to that. Okay, so if we know as Nigeria that these are the things we have strength in that have value or interest to South Africa, we identify it. Again, it's a data exercise. We identify it, we collate it, we make it available. Same thing, South Africa has those things which it has as points of strength. The fourth thing basically here, those are mentioned here about attitude and culture. okay? The need to recognize the fact that when you go into another country, there has to be that respect, okay? So what it means to dial it down a bit when you're engaging. Whenever you go into another country, you are a guest. You're being given an opportunity to turn up and show what you can do. Do that with the necessary humility, with the necessary expansiveness of temperament. That will take you further. Anything else other than that puts people's back up, people close down, don't want to engage with you. And the big thing about this is that perception is a killer.
Okay, I just want to quickly reiterate some of the key themes that have come out of the discussion leaders. Love each other. All right, if that's the overriding word that we're going to take out of this session, I love it. Thank you very much. MTN has forced a relationship. We see that the relationships are viable. So how do we take it to the next level? Get past the initial mistrust. Time is no longer for mistrust. We don't have time because the rest of the world is not waiting for us. We either got to play together or we're not going to have our place on the global stage. The imbalance of Nigerian companies in South Africa was brought up by Mr. Phillips. The infrastructure opportunities in Nigeria that South African companies can investigate. The technology opportunities in Nigeria that South African companies can investigate. Another element, let me tell you, is if you do not have Wi-Fi on arrival in a country, you cannot do business. It is impossible. When you arrive in Kigali, you are able to access, there are just a myriad of different access points for the internet, and you can get onto your devices immediately. It is impossible in Nigeria, unless there's a secret that I'm not able to unlock. It's not enough to ship products to Nigeria. We need to add value. This is about investment in services, investment in upskilling. So it's not just about shipping products, and at the end of the day, adding value. Some of the other elements that were brought up is that we know that we have similarities between our two big economies. And there's lots from a best practice perspective that we can learn from one another. It was mentioned that Cape Town is currently suffering a water shortage and is about to hit day zero. This is not something that is far removed from other issues or issues of a similar nature that we all experience across the African continent. So let's collaborate, let's share best practice from an ideas perspective. The benefits will be significant. Don't get distracted by the problems and the challenges. There are 120 big brand companies in South Africa. We need information, data sharing on how many Nigerian companies are operating in South Africa. It goes both ways. Let's collaborate, let's share. Data is the center of the universe, the knowledge economy going forward. Agriculture and tourism, we know we can leverage our economies on that front. Change the narrative. We've heard that over and over again. We hear it at the World Economic Forum ad nauseum. But it is about changing the narrative for the better and taking the low-hanging fruit. What can we completely turn on its head? Immigration challenges, this, ladies and gentlemen, we need to solve in this room and give it to the policymakers and say that if we don't solve our immigration problems, we actually can't kickstart this relationship. And that visa is a central tool for mobility. So again, let's not forget it. We've got two giants. Let's work together to create that Agenda 2063. We can do it. And then finally, don't lose the context of the African continent. We are still incredibly poor across Africa. So our context is not the same as the developed world, which means that we have to leverage the technologies and the infrastructures more cleverly to fast-track the solutions. And look at the landlocked countries, look at those opportunities in terms of how can Nigeria, how can South Africa leverage those opportunities and share best practice. All about collaboration and best practice.
And that's it on this Brand South Africa roundtable discussion focusing on achieving economic integration between Nigeria and South Africa, organized in collaboration with CNBC Africa. I'm Onyi Sunday. Thank you so much for watching.